Hello and welcome back to the offensive line. On this week's episode, we have a phrase that didn't rise in popularity until only recently, maybe in the last 15 years or so. And the phrase is simply gospel-centered.
Other similar forms of the same phrase are Christ-centered, cross-centered, Jesus-centered. If a church or an individual is centered on the gospel, that is a good thing. That's actually the best thing they can be centered on. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about Christ's death and resurrection being of first importance.
Being gospel-centered doesn't mean that everything else in the Bible that is not the gospel is unimportant. It's just that the gospel is central to us. That's why Hanson and I started this channel, because we wanted to help other Christians who are trying to share their faith, sharing the gospel, which should be at the very center of our lives. Teaching you defense in season 1 to prepare you for the best offense, which we'll talk about in season 3.
When churches and Christians aren't gospel-centered, they center themselves around other things like politics or Christian living or even denominations. In fact, I've actually encountered a lot of churches like that, where it's just assumed that everyone who comes on a Sunday knows the gospel, so there is no need to emphasize it each and every week.
Instead, churches need to be gospel-centered. Even though gospel-centered is a fairly new term, this idea is nothing new. In 1 Timothy 2, Paul describes the common confession of all those in the church. He who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory.
If you are watching this video and you go to church, hopefully you find yourself in agreement with what Paul has said. That's exactly the type of church we talked about in our season 1 video on why should I join a church. But it's not just churches that need to be gospel-centered, individual Christians as well, because churches are made up of individual Christians.
Christians need to be gospel-centered. It's a counter to the very me-centered way many people, even Christians, think and live. It is very much what Paul says in my favorite verse in Galatians 2:20. It says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me."
That's actually my favorite verse too. Jesus Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, and when we become Christians, we want to live that truth out. It's not that we are no longer alive, but that we no longer live life for the self-centered reasons we might have lived life for before we were Christian. We now live lives that are gospel-centered, Christ-centered, cross-centered. That's what this verse is saying.
A Christian who does not live in this way is not living out their newness of life to the fullest of what God desires from us. They might have spiritual lives, but they might not have given their lives completely to Jesus. And if they continue on living with a semblance of Christianity, but not actual gospel living, then they might just end up hearing the 7 scariest words. "Depart from me, I never knew you."
That's exactly it. In Matthew 7 verse 21, Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven," because we see there that they have a vain profession. In verse 22, we see that many will have a vain product, where they did many works in Jesus' name, and to those who have vain professions and vain products, Jesus will declare to them, "I never knew you, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness."
Hopefully that was another encouraging video for you guys. I hope Hanson didn't scare you guys too much with that last part, but it really is quite a scary thought to live your whole life thinking that you're a Christian, only to find that on the last day, Jesus says those words to you. Hopefully you still give us that like for this video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like that. We are the offensive line, and we're uncomplicating the complicated. You on living with a semblance of Christianity.
Semblance.
It's like resemblance. Semblance?
Probably.
Semblance.
Oh.
What about that one?